Oh, hi everyone, Big Thinny Head Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Danny Brown album, Quaranta. This is the newest album from Detroit rapper Danny Brown. It is not just his sixth commercial album, but also the long-teased follow-up to his XXX record in 2011, or 30, which was the breakout album he dropped in commemoration of turning 30. Which is an odd time to pop off as a rapper. It happens, but it's rare. Especially in Danny's case, as Detroit isn't the easiest place to make it out of as an artist. Plus, his trademark yelpy delivery and outlandish, crude humor is not for everybody, and also made him a somewhat polarizing figure out of the gate. But nowadays, Danny is more or less accepted as a veteran, a pioneer, for the current generation of eccentric internet rap weirdos. And that proverbial passing of the torch is part of what made the collab album he dropped earlier this year, Scaring the Hoes with JPEG Mafia, so good. Now, in some ways, Danny has kind of had his run at this point. He had that big splash with XXX, then somewhat of a mainstream peak around his old era where many of his singles had a party appeal. There was also his experimental opus Atrocity Exhibition, where he took his fans into some of the darkest corners of his mind. And then a few years later, he hit us with the solid but unsurprising You Know What I'm Saying, where I wouldn't necessarily say he was playing it super safe, but he did make it clear he was not going to kill himself over a record again like he was on Atrocity, which I will say did have me wondering what Quaranta would be when it eventually came out. For sure, I didn't expect Danny to push himself to the brink on this record, but would this be as big and as career-defining as XXX was? I mean, even with full intention of doing that, that's a hard feat to pull off. And for sure, this LP does not fill the shoes of 30, and feels like more of an update than a sequel. An update on who Danny is as an artist and a person currently. And when you compare a record like this to the material on XXX, it's kind of night and day. Even if Danny does throw a bar out on Tantor that says, he's gone to a therapist, but he still ain't changed. Because even if Danny was a bit old when the spotlights did hit him when his career started to take off, there is legitimately an old Danny at this point. And I think Tantor and a few other moments on this project show Danny kind of plugging into that past chaotic side of himself that is probably going to be there from now into the future to some degree, but the bulk of this record is actually spent in more of a contemplative and moody mode, far more than anything he's put out in the 2010s, which makes this project more cutting on an emotional level than anything. Take the very forlorn opening track, for example, where the main takeaway is Danny being surprised, on some level at least, that he's still rapping at this point, reflecting on what he's gained, what he's lost, over these really cinematic guitars and chunky drums that read like something out of the Kill Bill soundtrack. It's a great tone setter, and we see this vibe reinforced by tracks deeper into the record, like Ain't My Concern, which is another brooding cut with primal drum loops, eerie keys, some jarring horn hits that feel almost like jump scares. I wish it was longer, but the song still does come through with a clear and coherent message that in order for Danny to make it, he had to clear his mind and path of things that were not his concern, were not his business, were distractions or destructive detours. It's not the best structured song here by any means, but it's still some food for thought and does accurately paint the mindset that Danny is in currently. Deeper into the record, we go deeper into Danny's past with the song Y.B.P, where he raps about his upbringing and being poor, living in the city of Detroit, with this kooky, somewhat silly and funky beat that sounds like a sitcom theme from the 70s. In the bars, he describes changing television channels with a pair of pliers, kids raising kids, coming from a broken home. He really goes deep into detail on this one, and there's a great guest verse from Bruiser Wolf on this track too, whose odd and hilarious delivery will be striking to anybody who hasn't heard him before. He does usually bring some big E40 vibes to the table on a track, but honestly, his flow and just how tongue-in-cheek it is here and there has something even older at play within it. It's reading almost like Curtis Blow. But yeah, this is one of the best groomed songs of the bunch on this thing. The topical focus goes even harder on the following Jen's Terrific Vacation, which is a funny play on words for gentrification. Danny describes greedy landlords, white people, Whole Foods, electric scooters, all flooding into an area that uproots the black community that once lived there. Danny doesn't usually posture himself as a social or political rapper, but somehow does better on this topic than most who approach approach it. Not to mention this song is attached to one of the most unique instrumentals on the entire record, with these creepy synth chords and strange whispered refrains of "Where You Gonna Go?" Not to mention the insane, dizzying drum parts throughout the entire track that sound like just this amazing jazz drum solo getting chopped up into various pieces. Following from here, the song Down With It is about a relationship that Danny just kind of failed within, or allowed to die on the vine because his head was just kind of caught up in the music business and being famous and getting attention. And now he's regretting it. He's realizing that he loved her. And the loneliness that comes with this is something he alludes to at least several points on the record. So, I mean, given that he keeps coming back to it, I imagine the regrets he's expressing here are large. It certainly feels that way, especially as these noisy layers rush in toward the very finish of the track and really bring the emotions of the whole thing to a fever pitch. And as I was saying, a similar kind of loneliness is also reflected on the track Shakedown, but maybe with less impact. There is at least a bit of progression, though, on the song Celibate featuring Mike, where Danny talks about engaging in behaviors that at one time may have gotten him in trouble, but now he doesn't fuck around, he's celibate. It's a low-key cut about learning from your mistakes, taking your lumps too, heeding a cautionary tale, which is nothing new for Danny, as many remember, because at the very end of Atrocity Exhibition, he made it pretty clear that he tells a lot of these stories and he says a lot of these things so that people don't do the same shit he did. And of course, the Mike feature on the track is solid too. Now, the ending of this record, I'm a bit mixed on. On the song Hanami, we have these cinematic instrumental loops, once again, that feel like something out of a soundtrack. And outside of not wasting any time or kind of just expressing some vague sentiments about time, the track doesn't really deepen the album's lyrical substance. In fact, it feels like on a lot of these bars, he's just kind of coming back around to things he's already expressed earlier on the record, which I guess in one breath could make sense given it is toward the end of the record. But with that being said, it's not that long of an album to begin with. Much of what Danny is saying here, he was just kind of talking about just minutes ago. Which brings me to my biggest issue with this record overall, that clearly this is supposed to be a more introspective record for Danny, and one where he's trying to relay some sage-like advice, at least some of the time. And I just don't think he digs deep enough into some of the topics and feelings that he approaches on these songs, and as a result, the commentary feels very surface level, or redundant by the end of the record where he's repeating himself a bit. That being said, though, I do like the closing track Bass Jam, which features this pretty and almost ambient instrumental with a very sweet, chill, harmonious bass line, and over it Danny is rapping about his younger self being with his family, having a nice day with them, and there is certainly a level of tension and trauma there that is not being explored or discussed in any significant way, but somehow music becomes a conduit for this instead. It becomes a way for him and his family to commiserate, despite everything that's going on, despite the hardships, despite the brokenness, despite all of these shortcomings, all of these emotional scars. The music is there to kind of make things better and create some level of emotional understanding between everyone there, which is a pretty significant and touching picture and message, and not just for this record, but in general, but certainly adds up into the most moving finish for any Danny project so far. I will say Quaranta, I wasn't entirely in love with it, though I did like it. I kind of expected something a bit bigger, even if this record was just going to be kind of a snapshot of where Danny is currently. And when I say bigger, I don't mean more extreme, more aggressive, more in your face, or anything like that. I suppose some extra verses and a wider variety of topics and tracks on this thing would have made for a more comprehensive listen, and I just don't feel like I get that on this record, though I will say, the majority of the songs on this thing, good. Solid, but not necessarily thorough, and that's where I think the record falls short. I'm feeling a strong 7 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Danny Brown, forever.